Well, hello there, and welcome to your guitar lesson, which now brings us to number 15 in your new books. Incidentally, if you haven't yet received the new book, don't worry too much, because in today's program, I'm going to give you everything that you need on the screen. But it would be a good idea if you've got a pencil to have it ready, because I'm going to give you a new chord, a form of F chord later on. And it would be nice to be ready for that when I give it to you, in case you haven't got the book. Now, the subject of this lesson is basically more about chords, and we're going to find 3 different ways to accompany a simple tune, and I've chosen a tune that I think almost all of you will know, the tune of Silent Night. And we're also going to do a few corrections aimed not at telling you so much you're doing something wrong as making it more comfortable for you to play the guitar. And this I think you'll see when we get into the detail of it. Now, as far as our tuning is concerned, I've changed the picture slightly so that while you tune, you see on the staff the musical note that you're tuning. And I hope that this will do something to help the interrelationship of you and your score, getting used to seeing notes and relating that to what they sound like. So let's do that now. Let's get in tune, and then we'll get to our corrections. Now let's consider the left hand first, because in checking around with some of you, I found that the greatest deviations from the norm, I would say, are related to the left hand. In fact, I have seen some very funny left hand positions still happening. Let's look at a very good one. In this beautiful painting by Caravaggio, which dates back to 1598, but it shows us that some things really don't change. And the lady, as you will see, has her thumb behind the fingerboard, in this case of a lute, but the principle is exactly the same. And she is not bending her thumb. She has it straight out, not stressed, but just lying in the middle of the back of the fingerboard in that very graceful-looking position. Now, let's look at my left hand, which is perhaps not quite as graceful as that, and show you that what I'm really saying is that I don't want to see this thumb bending like this. And the reason is that when we come back to doing chords, if the thumb is bent, you can see it has tremendously restricted my capability of reaching out. The same if I have the thumb anywhere around here. I absolutely can, there's hardly anywhere in the world I can reach the 4th fret, whereas in the first position, I should be easily able to reach each of the first 4 frets. So if you have been thinking, and some of you have written to me even about this, that you just don't have the stretch, or your left hand has a clench on it, or even a little arthritis problem, it is much more likely that your thumb position at the back of the neck is at fault, and not the other things that you think it may be. So, to make life more comfortable in that department, please try and correct your left hand position now. If necessary, use a mirror when you play, and be very scrupulous with yourself. All right, the next point relates to metal strings on the guitar. I notice a number of you are still following along the course, but using an acoustic guitar with metal strings. There's nothing wrong with this. Some people play solo music beautifully on the metal string guitar. John Renbourn, I might mention, for one. But the only trouble is to your right hand. Obviously, in the style we're learning, with the nylon strings, we're using the nails to play the notes. And using the nails on metal strings, particularly when they get a bit rusty, is rather unpleasant. So the better plan, I suppose, is to use finger picks and thumb picks and so on. However, that's not the main drift of our lessons. But what I'm saying is that those of you who are joining us, and I know there are even some rock players who are with us to learn musical notation, I certainly welcome having you along, but don't try to play the metal strings with the nails, because I think you'll have a problem with that. Now, the third point relates to the action, the playing action of the guitar, and this is, again, very much a thing of comfort. And I did show you something about this in a very early lesson, but I notice a number of you still have maladjusted guitars and perhaps were afraid to actually make the correction on your guitar. So let's now take a look at a guitar and see if we can see a little more specifically how we make that correction. Now, last time I mentioned some coins that you could slip under to give you the height, but I think that's not quite as specific as I would like. So now I'm going to give you some measurements. At the nut, this end of the guitar, go for about 1/16 of an inch of clearance under the string. That's the space between the fingerboard and the string itself. That translates to about 1.5 millimeters. And you might want to note this, actually. And at the 12th fret, go, when you measure it and get it right down onto the wooden part, go for 3/16 here, or about 5 millimeters. Now, this, I cannot give you one setting that is absolutely perfect for every guitar, because guitars vary, and sometimes there's a slight warp in the neck even, which will make a slight difference. But that's a good starting point, and if it sounds clear and doesn't buzz at all at the frets, then you've hit it. If there's a slight buzzing, then you may have to go a little bit higher at the bridge end to compensate for that. Now, I know a lot of you are nervous about actually doing anything to your guitar, so I want to show you now just how easy this is. All you do is loosen off the strings a bit, and I've got these a little bit pre-loosened to show you. Get your hand underneath the strings when they're really slack, and just lift them like this. And as you get down where the nut is, you'll see that it isn't glued in, and it will in fact just slide out like that. Now, notice that the grooved part has been carefully shaped to take the strings, so you're not going to do any cutting on that. So turn it over, and to reduce the height, if supposing it's too high, just file away with any old a nail file, even a good diamond dust nail file will do it, to bring it down the necessary little bit that you want to if you're lowering the action. Usually you're lowering it, because if it's stiff, it's too high. One tip also is draw a line before you start your filing, so that you can see exactly what you have done, in fact. Now, at the bridge end, up here, it's exactly the same situation. You raise the strings, and you can push out the bridge bone, and again, file it from underneath, so that you don't adjust. There's a curve, in fact, to the top of the bridge bone, and that needs to remain as it is. It shouldn't be altered. If, by contrast, your nut or bridge bone are too low, you can put a little bit of card or something underneath to raise it up a bit. That's a very simple thing. Just cut a piece of card to go in that slot. And very often, at least as a temporary measure, that'll get you out of problems. The way to know if it's too low is that it's probably buzzing a lot. And that's all there is to it. Up with the strings, and back goes the nut. try and remember, if you can, which end relates to the bass. You should probably mark it before you take it out, that this is the bass end and that's the treble end, because they could be a little different. Right, now let's get back to our question of chords. And the first thing I think I'd like to do is to look at our old friends, the C and G seventh chord, because I think they're the ones that you're the most familiar with now. Now, as we look at those chord spots, we see that the C chord has 5 notes, and the G7th has 6. And a number of you have asked me, well, is that the only way you can play a C chord, or does it have to have 5 notes? Is it complete that way? And now, if you take a look at my left hand, here is our familiar C chord, but also this is a C chord, and this is also a C chord. So what is the essential element that makes a chord follow that name or be identified that way? Let's take a look at the major scale, because so often people relate chords to the scale. You'll hear the expression the 1 chord, the 4 chord, or the 5 chord very often, and these entirely relate to the degrees of the scale and the key that you're playing in. Let's start, for instance, with the C. If I want to build a C chord, all I have to do is put a note a third above the C and another note, another third above it on the 5th. And here I have what is in fact a complete and perfect C chord. Ah, you say, that didn't look like any of the C chords you just played on the guitar. Well, the essential part of it is the 3 notes, the C, the E, and the G, but they don't have to be in this arrangement. We call this close-spaced for obvious reasons. We call it root position because the C, which makes it a C chord, is the bottom note of the 3. But there is nothing to stop me putting this G up here, up an octave, and even the E, like that. And in fact, this is still a perfect C chord. Not only that, I can double some of the notes. For instance, I might put in another G here. And it's still a C chord. So what I want you to understand from this, and it's a simple thought, there are only 3 notes that make up a C chord, but they can be doubled, rearranged, to fill out and make nice chords in the situation that you require them. Now, this expression, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, let's talk about the 5 chord here, because it's the commonest related one to the tonic chord here. Let's count up 5 on the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we arrive at the note G. Now, if we build a chord there in exactly the same way, put on a third and another third, we have a complete chord, all the component notes of the G chord, and it is known as the 5 chord because it's built on the 5th of the scale. Now, you had a 7th, and the 7th is a very simple, it's the addition of 1 more note. This is the 3rd, this is on the 5th, on the 7th note up. If we add 1 more note, we've got all the component parts of the 7th chord, and the 7th chord, as you noticed, is the one that has this effect of leading you back to the tonic or main chord. There is 1 more chord that is very, very common in any simple song. These are far the most common chords, and the other most common one is the one built on 4, the one they call the 4 chord. And again, all we have to do is build up notes in the same way. I'll borrow that one for the complete G chord. And we have a family of chords which, in fact, could be transferred to any other scale. That's to say, if I were to have a scale of G here, I could find out what the 1, 4, and 5 chords were in exactly the same way by simply building, in this simple way, building up thirds on the chords concerned. So, if you can, remember that when you see a chord diagram, it'll give you perhaps as I say, as many as 5 or 6 notes, but they'll always, if it's a common chord, there'll be doubled versions of those 3 essential notes. Now let's learn about the F chord, because that's one we haven't done so far. And the reason we haven't done it is because it involves a half bar. Now let's look at it in the chord block, and here's what we do. On the 4th string, 3rd finger gets the F, A with the 2nd finger, and the top 2 are both covered by the 1st finger. And this is why we call it a barred chord, because the 1st finger is doing a small bar to cover those 2 notes. Now we'll be going into this in much greater detail in a lesson or 2, so for the moment just do it practically and find this chord. All right, find the F on the 4th string, A, C, and the top F, and those top 2 are covered with the 1st finger. Let's play the chord. Top 4 strings, thumb on the fingers, and there it is. Now, let's bring in the C chord and practice getting from the F to the C. All right, hold it on the F chord where you are, and let's move from there back to the C chord. Notice it's a very small movement. You don't have to go far. 3rd and 2nd fingers are simply moving over 1 string. Let's go back to the F chord, 3rd finger over to the F, 2nd finger over to the A, and 1st finger over those top 2. Play the F again, and back to the C again. And that's all there is to it, and those are the 3 chords with the G7th that you already know very well that we're going to use now in our practical accompaniment. Now let's get to the practical part. It's good practice for the new chord, and also we're going to learn a little something about a different way to do the accompaniment. The first one, let's keep it simple. Let's just do a plain strum this way each time you see the chord. Just running your thumb across the strings like that. All right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the melody on, and both you and I are going to do our best to accompany it in time. It's quite difficult to do in some ways because it's going quite slowly, but obviously for you to find the chords, I don't want to run it too fast. Let's do it, and then you'll see as we go along what's happening. All right, are you ready? Here it comes. 1, 2, 3. All right, that wasn't too difficult, was it? Now, let's take probably the next commonest way of accompanying something in 3/4 time, which is your basic sort of m-pa-pa, thumb and finger type of strum. Let's get a C chord for this. And what you do is with the thumb, play the C, and on the upper 3 strings, use your fingers to play the rest of the chord, like this. When you come to the F chord, you've only got 4 notes, so obviously you're going to play the thumb on the F, the bottom note, and the fingers on the top three. When you play your G7th chord, pick the G at the bottom, and again the top three strings with your fingers. So always you're using those first three strings with your fingers. All right, as before, always, I think the easiest way to learn to do it is just to do it. We'll do our best to lock ourselves into the melody, but I know it's not that easy. All right, let's give it a try. 1, 2, 3. All right, a little trouble getting locked in there at first, but once you get the feel of it, I think it's not so hard. It's obviously also very much easier when you're doing the singing and can really align your playing to your voice. Now, I want to show you one third way, which is with a simple arpeggio that you'll see come up on the screen. We're just simply going to go up and down the chord using the same notes that you used previously in that rather waltz time format. Now this is one I know you're going to have to practice during the week, but let's go through it once and you get as much of it as you can and then practice the rest when you've got more time for it. All right, let's give it a try now with the arpeggio form. 1, 2, 3. Well, of course, the arpeggio is the more difficult of the three versions, I think, but in many ways the most rewarding. Interesting tune, Silent Night. It's reputed to have been first played on the guitar because, as the story has it, in the monastery where they were going to perform it, the organ broke down and a guitar was brought out instead. Now, I'd like to play a folk song for you while we're in this mood, the low D tuning. This one, a Catalan one called El Testament de Noelia, arranged by the Spanish guitarist and composer Miguel Llobet. El Testament de Noelia.